I'm very excited to introduce you to our speakers. Today we have Dr. Wendy Ingram, who's a postdoc at the Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, as well as the founder and executive director of Dragonfly Mental Health. And we have Kelsey Best, a PhD candidate from Vanderbilt University, who is also the current president of the Vanderbilt Graduate Student Council. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker. So Wendy, if you will please take it away.
Hi, thank you so very much for having me here. It's wonderful to be invited and specifically to be invited to share my personal story and how that relates to the advocacy work that I've been doing for mental health within academia. So it begins in 2009. 2009 for me was a fantastic year. After a whirlwind tour of 4 top research universities, I had chosen to do my PhD in molecular and cell biology at UC Berkeley. It was a large umbrella program with 5 different divisions, ranging from biochemistry to neuroscience. I was going to have 55 incoming classmates who I was relieved to discover were all instant friends. They were smart, so nerdy for science, and like me, had chosen Berkeley not only because of the amazing research, but also because there were so many other wonderful things to do in the Bay Area, and the other students there seemed genuinely happy. I was literally singing California songs at the top of my lungs the entire way out there in the car, driving from Arizona. When I got there, I unpacked my tiny apartment, went and got my Cal ID card, and then booked an appointment with a psychiatrist. You see, I have bipolar disorder, and depression and anxiety in my family. And during undergrad, I was showing more and more signs of having developed bipolar disorder myself. In fact, I was most certainly manic during most of my interviews. While exciting to most people, I didn't sleep almost at all. I stayed out the latest of any recruit and was still awake and alert and fresh and totally on it for my interviews all day. I wasn't the least bit intimidated by the faculty and spoke confidently and probably a little too enthusiastically about my undergrad research. My mind was quick and I was both intense and creative when discussing their research too. Did this work to my benefit? In some cases, clearly yes, I got into Berkeley. And in others, I'm sure no. What I was sure about was that I was excited to be at Berkeley, and I needed to fortify my seawall against the inevitable crushing waves of manic and depressive episodes that I knew high stress situations can trigger with mood disorders. I had never required hospitalization or medication to resolve prior episodes, but I had been studying psychology and reading about these illnesses for over 7 years already at that point. And I knew that I was about to voluntarily embark on some of the hardest 6 years of my life. I wanted to be prepared, and seeking professional help was first on my list. But that wasn't all I did. I established care with a psychiatrist. I made friends in my grad program and disclosed to those that became closest and I trusted, as well as talked to certain family members and my best friends from home. And I gave them all permission to discuss my situation with each other. And if any of them became worried, they could talk to each other and talk to me. Once I joined a lab, actually, I joined 2. I hesitated to disclose to my PIs, but one point second year, it became inevitable, unavoidable. During one of my depressive episodes, when I couldn't read more than a sentence at a time and was horribly delinquent on agreed upon deadlines for writing up a manuscript, I set up an appointment to reveal my condition to one of my mentors. Disclosing to them was terrifying, but when I did, they were incredibly supportive and really appreciated all of the preventative steps I had taken. I gave them my parents' information and permission to contact them as well if I ever fell off the map again or showed other concerning behavior. In the end, I think I did a pretty good job during grad school, but it always kind of came in waves. You'd have to ask my mentors, but based on their professional letters of recommendation that got me interviews with many prestigious labs and ultimately my Hopkins postdoc, I guess they thought I did okay. My paper from grad school was well cited and even covered by mainstream media. But the thing is, while I was in grad school, I cycled the entire time, pretty much unchecked. And it was more challenging than I can properly convey in this setting. You might be thinking to yourself, but you had a psychiatrist. You set up a support network. You knew about the illness. What happened? You are more prepared than most. Yes. But I never went back to that psychiatrist. See, one of the most horrible things about mental illness is that a lot of times the illness itself makes it challenging to get the care you need when you need it. Even when you did all the right things, when you were doing okay, even when you have a supportive network of loving friends and family, even when ad infinitum, it's hard. I did go see a psychologist for a lengthy period of time during third and fourth year, but not for my bipolar disorder. You see, I was bullied relentlessly in one of my labs, starting the day I picked my project and joined the lab. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder type symptoms, hypervigilance, extreme avoidance behavior, rumination, anxiety attacks, all of which worsened my mood disorder. But another one of the hardest things about mental health struggles is the fact that there is a lot of comorbidity or overlap and bidirectional influence of supposedly discrete diseases. The fact is that a lot of people experience varying levels of anxiety, depression, stress response, and various diagnosable symptoms and disorders. And they are all playing into you, your genetics, your coping mechanisms, your knowledge, your environment, and your society. It's hard to disentangle, and even harder with mental illnesses because they are almost all laden with extreme stigma that create massive barriers to seeking professional and social support. I, and honestly my psychologist, could only deal with one thing at a time, even though everything was happening at once, all to the same person. This entire time during grad school, well into my 5th year, my personal mental health journey was just that, personal. A very select few people knew anything about my struggles and the care I was receiving, let alone my diagnosis. As you may know, bipolar disorder is one of the official severe mental illnesses. And as it turns out, I have rapid cycling bipolar 1, which is, according to the medical texts, associated with some of the worst outcomes. But why is bipolar disorder so different from the fact that I am 5'9" or that I have asthma and allergies? My height and my immune disorders are equally influenced by biology and environment. Both asthma and bipolar disorder are episodic and treatable. Height, asthma, and bipolar disorder are all highly polygenic and developmentally dependent on environmental factors. So why are they so different? The answer is obvious: stigma. I told as few people as possible during most of grad school because I feared their judgment, their disregard, their labeling me as broken or crazy or not smart enough or lazy. Even those that I had very good reason to believe would be supportive or understanding, including my other mentor, I didn't tell unless absolutely necessary. That was the professional thing to do, right? My 5th year in grad school changed that forever. In 2013, one of my friends and classmates died due to depression and suicide. In fact, there was a suicide at every level of just our department that year. We lost a faculty member, a postdoc, and an undergrad too. It's too difficult to describe the impact of losing someone to suicide, so I'm not gonna try. As my classmates and I were trying to find our bearings and figure out how to deal with the loss of our friend and colleague, we got to talking, and we discovered that despite all of us being so close in so many ways and spending so much time together, most of us were struggling. Most of us had seen counselors, some of us for very long periods of time, and none of us had told each other. Everyone kept it a secret. Everyone hid it as best they possibly could. It was because of this revelation that a group of us founded what we called the MCB Grad Network and began in our own way to try to address this toxic cloud of silence about mental health struggles, extremely common stressors in grad school, and began to dismantle the stigma around suffering from and seeking help for the most critical thing for success in graduate school: our minds. It's a pretty surreal experience at times being a mental health researcher, struggling with my own lived experience, and having suffered terrible loss due to mental illness. You see, a few months after we founded the MCB Grad Network and had planned our first event aimed at giving third years a serious heads up about what they were about to face, we prepared an introductory statement that members of the MCB Grad Network were going to present at all the faculty meetings, asking faculty to support their students attending our events and why. To this day, I viscerally remember walking down the hall to the meeting and listening to my dad on the phone tell me that my cousin was in the hospital and had barely survived a suicide attempt. I was so thankful that we had already planned to have 2 of us at each of the faculty meetings, because there was no way I was going to be able to keep it together to deliver that message. My cousin died 2 years later after several more attempts. And 14 months after that, one of my closest friends and colleagues from Berkeley and one of the co-founders of the MCB Grad Network, Dr. Chris Alvaro, had died by suicide as well. After my cousin died, I fell into a deep and terrifying depressive episode. But after losing Chris, I reached out to my psychiatrist colleague and got a referral to see a psychiatric resident at Hopkins, the third highest ranked residency program in the US. And I also joined forces with a slew of absolutely incredible graduate students at Hopkins and created another grad network. This time it was the School of Public Health Mental Health Grad Network. And over the last 2 years, we worked with students, faculty, wellness, and mental health care staff and administrators to create some truly spectacular change. We've developed mental health literacy talks, tools for supporting trainee mental health workshops, and anti-stigma films interviewing faculty, talking about their own lived experience with mental health struggles. I've delivered these at UC Berkeley, Johns Hopkins, Notre Dame, University of Arizona, and even Europe. The need is great, but my desire to make positive change is greater. Graduate students have 8 times higher rates of severe depression and anxiety than the general population. Those with higher IQ report higher rates of mood disorders and are less likely to seek treatment. And mood disorders underlie 80 to 90% of all suicides. A comparison I like to make is between elite athletes and academics. The best athletes in the world train incredibly hard. They give their all to achieve peak performance in their field. But when there's an injury, even the smallest one, the response is to address it immediately, even courtside, for all the world to see. The response to address it is immediate. We are privileged to be able to train our minds at the highest levels as scientists and academics. Yet when our minds, the most critical instrument for our work, is injured or strained, we tend to just keep doing what we're doing. This is no longer acceptable. We've now founded a nonprofit to focus on mental health in academia called Dragonfly Mental Health. We've named it and chosen the logo in honor of my friend Chris Alvaro. While we were in grad school, they designed and tattooed this dragonfly on their wrist, which represented transformation, hope, and wisdom. For us, it'll be a constant reminder of why we are doing what we're doing. We are by academics, for academics. We're global, inclusive, and multidisciplinary. And we aim to accelerate the evidence-based research, consulting services, and create systemic change in academia for mental health. Right now we have 70 volunteers from 14 different countries, over 20 different universities, and more than 20 disciplines. And we're working together as a global consortium for academic mental health to conduct independent research, create systemic change, bring academics together through networking in Dragonfly Cafe, and deliver on-campus events and interventions. We welcome you to contact us or visit our website to learn more, invite us to your campus, or join us in networking through Dragonfly Cafe. I'm happy to answer questions after the next speaker as well.
We have a couple of questions already, I believe, so we'll go ahead and get into that. So the first one is, as being a Master's of Science candidate with obsessive compulsive disorder, I know that it won't go away. Instead, I have to balance the stress. I'm surprised that universities are more engaged in competition rather than making a meaningful impact in science. How can, that's my dog, sorry. How can one avoid that stress when trying to make meaningful achievement? So if either of you have tips for managing stress or avoiding that stress while trying to progress, we would love to hear it.
This is Wendy. I'd be happy to tackle that first. Having a chronic mental health condition myself, I completely understand and agree. And I think that one of the things that gets lost quite a bit is the fact that a large chunk of us are not only going to have episodic stress, but have a certain portion of us will, for sure, just based on general population prevalence, have depression, have bipolar disorder, have OCD. These are long-term chronic conditions. And so these are things that are being left behind and are absolutely not served by university principles like limiting your counseling to 6 a year or 6 entire career even. Like putting these limits, putting these caps on access to care is discriminatory against people who have long-term chronic conditions and need long-term support. And so I totally feel you on that and struggle with it myself. And one of the things that I agree with you as well, the culture of science and of academia is very focused on things that basically put the science and the people at odds with the, there's a conflict of interest. So the university wants to recruit the best researchers, but the best researchers can only do the best science and make themselves attractive to universities if they bring in dollars. So it kind of comes down to research dollars. It comes down to things that put it, conflict of interests between student well-being, faculty well-being, and especially for folks that, like you and me, that have chronic conditions that deserve to be treated like any other chronic medical condition.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think I don't have too much to say. So I have anxiety and depression, so I also completely understand where you're coming from. And I think in a lot of ways, the academic institution is ableist. It puts so much pressure on productivity above everything else, above well-being, and that's not sustainable. So something I've done personally that has helped is I've found mentors who are also vocal about their own challenges, their own mental health challenges throughout their careers. And I think, again, Wendy, you sharing your story, the more we have these conversations, just chipping away at that culture as much as possible and understanding that you're not alone in struggling with this.
Great, thank you. And while our speakers have been so brave and in self-disclosing, I don't want to leave them hanging out to dry. So I've also been diagnosed with mid-grade clinical depression. That's something I'll deal with for the rest of my life. That's not going away. And during grad school, I had pretty severe PTSD from a situation, and it's incredibly difficult to deal with. And I just want everyone out there to know that, yeah, I seemed fine on the outside. I think Wendy and Kelsey have touched on that too. It doesn't mean you don't have friends that are also struggling. So try to find your people. Okay, so questions from the audience, moving on. This one's specifically for Kelsey. Is there any accountability for PIs who don't follow the rules of your mental health bill of rights and responsibilities? For example, if they set up meetings during support group meetings or aren't allowing for doctor's appointments during work from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Is there anything like that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So that accountability is a lot of what led to the formation of the graduate life coach role. So Stacy is really there to help students have those conversations with their PIs, especially where there's a disconnect, there's some kind of conflict. She'll sit down with both the PI and the student where it's appropriate, or just the PI where that makes more sense, and try to facilitate that. If it goes beyond, something that a conversation or a mediation can help, there's a grievance process within the university that kind of elevates the challenge up the line. I think, so a lot of what the Graduate Student Council has been focusing on this past year, since I've been president, is around the mentorship and mentee relationship, because it's such a strange, powerful relationship for graduate students. There's this power dynamic, there's so much dependency in terms of your career progression, where you go after, that it can be really fraught, and it can be really difficult if that PI is not supportive, is not valuing your well-being. So we've been working on bringing more attention to that relationship. Part of that is developing programming, training for mentors. I think a lot of mentors have never had any training on how to be a good mentor. And that's been through the graduate school as well. We're trying to launch a survey as well that graduate students can take, just to gauge the health, if you will, of those mentor-mentee relationships, and trying to, in other ways, diffuse that power imbalance. So again, finding other mentors, building a support network beyond that one person or two PIs that you might have. But yeah, it's hugely important.
Great, thank you. This one I think you can both address. First, this person, thanks you very much and are super inspired by your actions. They've just recently started their PhD and they would like to start advocating for mental health at their university. Do you have any tips on where to start?
I can say the first thing to do is to find your tribe, find more people, find others like you who think like you, who are interested in this and want to be proactive and preventative. So find others, get organized, come up with things to start with, to work on. I usually, in all of our work, have started with get people in a room and just start brainstorming, and then you got to prioritize, because you can really only chip away at this iceberg of issues we're dealing with: personal, small, local ones, cultural ones, systemic ones, one thing at a time. And so organize, brainstorm, and then prioritize are the best ways forward. And if you are inspired by any of the kind of specific things that I mentioned, like forming a department-specific grad network that puts on events to talk to other students, we have a kind of pro forma, this is how we did it, what we talk about at each of the events, and what we, kind of a handbook, a start guide, so you don't have to do it and come up with it completely on your own and iterate from there. The nonprofit is going to create a whole series of these for different domains and types of, sizes of departments versus school-wide kind of efforts. So feel free to reach out to us too if you want more information or inspiration.
And I'll just add, I'm a little biased, but I think your elective student government body can be a good place to go first. They might have some of those existing structures or ways to reach out to the broader community. I know as grad students, we're often really siloed in our labs and our departments, so that could be a way to tap into existing structures.
Yeah, definitely another piece of advice. Try not to reinvent wheels. Hook your wagon to whatever's already moving.
I'm also a little biased.
Little wins for sure.
Yeah, I'm also a little biased towards grad student councils are similar because, like Kelsey said, it represents a lot of people, but also those people tend to already have connections to admin and other really important stakeholders, and they may be more willing to take a meeting if you're presenting through your grad student council than just you randomly emailing them. So that can be a good place to start. Okay, great. Moving on. So this also starts with many thanks for your talks and sharing your stories. Specifically for Kelsey regarding the Bill of Rights, How much faculty input did you seek or receive in drafting this versus admin input? They worry with graduate students that faculty mentors and advisors can often be the triggers for mental health episodes. And so how do you get more mentor involvement in helping students seek out the help that they may need?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we, of course, had to get faculty input into this. We went through, I mentioned there's a graduate faculty council, which is a group of faculty that already are very tuned in to graduate student needs and care a lot about that. So we got their input. We also were very closely involved with the directors of graduate studies. So the DGSs at Vanderbilt have monthly meetings where they all get together, and we had several presentations at those meetings. Because yeah, at the end of the day, if the PIs don't buy into what you're doing, then it might not actually mean much change on the ground. And I would say that the faculty, in a lot of ways, were some of the more challenging stakeholders to interact with, and we really had to build that relationship of trust. And I think at the end of the day, most faculty do want happy, healthy graduate students, and you just need to keep chipping away at it and making your case as to why what you're pushing for will lead to happier, healthier graduate students. And I would say part of that is not being afraid to speak the language of whoever you're interacting with. So if it's a PI, you might need to talk about what that means in terms of productivity, or in terms of, you know, the lab being sustainable, and framing it in a way that whoever you're talking to can get behind and feel good about it was a really big lesson for us as well.
We also at Hopkins developed a workshop for faculty mentor relationship and communication specifically, because we, identified the same thing, that relationship is so important and critical. And so we engaged with faculty in a way that was really interesting, because we approached it from finding out, why are they hesitating to talk to students? What do they push back against, or what are their gut responses when you say, we'd like to provide a workshop for faculty? And so for the why they hesitate, the majority of them said, we don't want to be invasive. I don't want to make it worse. Like they were coming from a place of uncertainty and hesitation and concern, and resulted in an unfortunate negative, or often negative impact of avoidance. And so we were like, oh, well, what if we gave you these skills? And they were like, but I don't want to be a counselor. I'm not trained for that. That's more. So they were pushing back against the workshop idea, just as you throw it out there, because they're like, that's more responsibility. That's more things I'm struggling to get by day to day. That's so much and I was like, no. So we are going to give you the skills in this workshop to establish those boundaries. Nobody wants you to be their counselor, like literally. We want you to be their mentor. But the being able to have those communications, figuring out what the barriers are for all members involved, is so helpful, to just be like, oh, yes. Here's how we're going to design it to meet your needs too. And boom, they love it.
That's amazing. That's so neat. Okay, being mindful of the time, I think this will probably be our last question. There are several more that we didn't get to, so I will ask our speakers to answer those via email, and I'll collect their answers and send them out to everyone who registered, so no worries about that. So this last one I think will be great for both of you to talk to. Do you have any advice for how to talk to your PI about your mental health struggles?
For me, the most important thing first was to deal with my self-stigma as much as possible. So talking myself up and truly believing that it is the same and should be treated the same as a medical illness. So for me, I, fortunately have both asthma and bipolar disorder. So those things are like, have a lot of overlaps with environmental triggers, developmentally, whatever, like having really weird, like you would just have to kind of address the symptoms, and things change depending on where you are and what's going on, and like over time and over your lifetime. And so there were just a lot of things for me to hang and connect those two things on. And so I had to talk myself up into truly believing what I was going to say to my PI was that this is an illness I have. This is also an illness I have. I have to have, different things involved. And also to kind of have a sense of what you're going to ask for. Because one of the things that is intimidating about hearing someone, like a student, disclose is, from the faculty perspective, they want to help you, but they might kind of panic. So be okay, be prepared for them to panic a little bit and be like, I'm not asking you to be my counselor. I'm not asking you to, ignore that. What I am asking you for is, I'm telling you this because, and this is how you can help support me. Like that, having that thought out ahead of time a little bit will make it a lot easier for everybody involved. Also, talk to your counselor and your psychologist or your therapist about how to do that and disclose properly to your PI. They can be very, very helpful with helping you figure out the words and the script and whatever it is you're going to do.
Yeah, I would say definitely talk to your counselor, talk to your therapist. Also, like I've mentioned a few times, I'm such a believer in mentors who are not your PI. So if you have a trusted mentor you want to try it out with, and you feel safer with them maybe than your PI, or talk to them about how to best talk to your PI about it. I think I just kind of blurted it out at my PI, and he was like, okay, let me know if you need anything from me, which was a nice response. But I also think, do it when you feel safe, do it when you feel comfortable. Don't add pressure on yourself with something like that, and lean on other people if you need to.
Great. Thank you so much. That was amazing. So again, my sincerest thanks to our wonderful speakers, and then for everyone who attended, and especially all of your amazing questions. And we will get to those that we couldn't answer live. If you want to follow up with me, I can for sure follow up with Kelsey and Wendy on behalf of you. Feel free to email me whenever. And with that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.